Hello and welcome to my presentation on key height generator. Um, in this presentation, I'm going to go through what a key height generator is used for and give a quick demonstration of how to use it. And then I'll go on to some extra information to be aware of in order to get the most out of using key height generator. So what is a key height? If this utility generates key heights, what is a key height? I have a link here to an example. So this one here is a very simple key height. It's only 10 by 10. And um, you'll see that it's a grid and there are coordinates on each cell. And each cell contains a character. Right? So this little web page is set up so that if I trace a path by clicking on a series of coordinates, um, I can produce a string. And I can copy that string and paste it where I need to paste it. So if I trace over that again, of course, you get the same string out. Now this one here was generated using B2 and H2. So here's the secret key that is part of this grid. So that's only a very trivial example of a key height. And in general, it's really only meant for random data. I strongly advise not putting, you know, words or non-randomly generated passwords in it, just random data only. Um, so a key hide. Um, so what's an example of needing a key hide? So I personally use a password manager, like a lot of people, and um, and password managers hold a lot of sensitive information, and I use multi-factor authentication, in particular a one-time password generator. Right, so that makes sure that having the username and the password is is not enough to get access. You need to have a password that has been generated uh, that's based on time. So this is quite secure, but the one downside is if I don't have access to that one-time password generator, I can't access my password manager, and that's a security feature by design. It does have one downside. So one example is if I'm on vacation and you know I lose my phone, I drop it off the side of the lookout as I'm taking a photo of the lovely view. I no longer have access to my passwords and my digital information. So that's a not a good way to be, and I'd prefer not to have to go and bother people or jump through a lot of hoops. So if I have a key hide online, if I've saved it somewhere and I remember the coordinates, then all I need to do is get my hands on a new phone and an internet connection, and provided those are both secure, um, then I can bring my password manager back online and have full access to all my digital information. So that's a very handy thing to be able to have. So that's my primary motivation for creating this key height generator. Great. So let's go through a quick example of generating a key height. So let's go to the key analysis page. Um, now I've already been playing with this one, but essentially what I've got is a series of keys that have been produced by setting up a multi-factor authentication on a password manager called LastPass. So I've got 5 samples here, but let's assume this first one is the real one. Um, and I've got a number of other samples which I'll explain why I've done that in a second. So let's put my real one in the key here, and these other 4 in the samples. Great. So if I go ahead and click Analyze, um, you'll see that it's picked the most likely item from the predefined characters. So what this is it defines what are the possible characters that could be in my key. And as you can see, there's a character tally down the bottom, and it illustrates that there are characters in this predefined character list that are not actually used in my key or any of the samples that I've provided. So um, those can be a bit of a problem. If you have a lot of characters um, that are not used in your key, that can present a bit of a security risk. So, but I'll illustrate that later. But for now, the general process is to remove extra characters. And you do that by clicking on these red characters to remove them. Great. Um, so it's recognized that I've got a space as my fragment separator. So it'll ignore those and reproduce those later in the path, you know, in the key hide. And it also gives me the option of the prefix and suffix. Now, some keys have predetermined prefix or suffix. So let's say that these LastPass keys, let's say every one of them starts with X3, and we don't want to actually put that in our path because then someone can detect or figure out where our path starts. So I can tell it, look, we're not going to put this in our path, the X3, just add it later on once I trace the path. And that way, no one has an indication of where my path starts. Similarly, for things like base 64 encoded keys, they commonly end with a equal sign, right? Maybe two. So we don't want those in our path because they'll indicate where our path ends. Great. So that's how we can leave off those equal signs, but still have them show up in our key once we've completed our path. So, but for our purposes, we're not going to have a suffix, but that's what that feature is for. Cool. So we've got our custom character set. We've got our key. We've got a fragment separator that's a space, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So here we have a grid. Now we can choose the size of our grid. This one's 16, or now it's 20 by 16. And what we need to do now is come up with a path that we can remember. So let's say that it's not too hard to come up with some coordinates that are easy to remember and try and make them just particular to you. So let's say I'm a mountain climber and K2 is a famous mountain. So I'll start with K2. Let's say I'm into my vitamins. I'll click on B12. And you can see that I've still got 5 characters to go. So I've got to come up with another cell. But you'll see that some of these are red already. And that means that I can't use those cells in my next step, because if I do, then the path will trace back over itself and there'll be a collision in the cell, which can only hold one character, right? So this gives some guidance as to what can be chosen next. Now you can see this one here is still green, and that's because there's a repeat character, and I am able to backtrack, double back over the path, and it won't cause a collision or a conflict. So if I say I want to click on B2, that's my path. I don't need to come up with any more cells to put in my path. But you'll also see that this path is actually longer than the key that I had originally entered. So that's fine. All the key hide will do is it'll just drop the last 5 characters so that the key is still the correct length and we're still free to use memorable coordinates in our key hide or for our path. Great. So that's our secret path is K2B12 B2. Great. So now let's go on to the next step. And here we have a confirmation step where we can just visually confirm that the randomly generated characters are we're comfortable with them. This one looks a bit weird. It's got three Z's there. So you can also click on this to see our path, and you can click regenerate. And of course, the, the path elements will not change. That they've got to stay the same. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that one. I'm ready to move on to the export step. So this is where I actually download the HTML file. Now it is downloaded as a .text file, and that's to avoid complications with malware detection software or virus scanners, which can block HTML files. So after you've downloaded the file, just rename it and take the extension off there, and you'll have an HTML file that will open in any browser or any modern browser. So if I save that, I've now got the file. And if I want to go ahead and try it out straight away, I can just click on the Open a New tab. Now, if I remember my coordinates, it's K2, B12, B2. And I can show those characters. Now, when you're actually using this, you don't have to show them. You can just have faith that you've traced the coordinates properly and just copy and reset to the clipboard. And now your secret key is not sitting around in a browser that you may forget about. So I'm just going to close that tab and go back here. So that is a basic demonstration of how to use key hide generator. So that HTML file I can now place online somewhere, and in order to get at my key, all I need to is go and visit that location, enter in my path, and I'll have my key back. So this software is if you want to know more, this project is hosted on GitHub. Just search for key hide gen, and freshcode.biz is my professional handle. My name's Peter. Feel free to reach out if you have any suggestions or feedback. Happy to get any of that. So thanks for listening to the first portion of this presentation. I'm now going to go into some more nuanced extra information that is handy to know when using key hide generator. So let's start back at the beginning. So if you're very security conscious and you're a bit nervous about putting your secret key into a random web page, that wouldn't be uncommon. So there is a way to use this utility and be confident that your key has not left your computer. So what you can do is load up this web page and then disconnect the computer from the internet, and go ahead and generate your key hide HTML file, and then close the browser and delete any cookies that you think might be lying around. And that way you can be confident that your key has never left the computer. So it's meant to just run standalone and doesn't actually contact any servers other than to download the initial utility. So that's one way to stay secure. I did mention this earlier, that this really is just for random data only. Even if it's base 64 encoded, that's not necessarily random. So just be very careful. I advise only using this for randomly generated data. So this, I did also talk about how these characters shouldn't really contain a lot of extra characters. So let's say, as an illustration, I'll give an illustration of why that can be a problem. So let's say my key is just all zeros and ones. Okay, I'm going to analyze that. It thinks it's octal. That's interesting. Oh, that's as basic as it gets. Okay, so ideally you would just do zeros and ones here, right? Do custom, and that way there's no extra characters. But if, say, instead we did alphanumeric lower, right? Now it gives us a tally of all the characters that shouldn't really be in there. And here we have a lot of them, which is a problem. So I'll just demonstrate what the problem is there. So if I click next, uh, can't specify both. Okay, so let's click next. Now let's trace a path, D1 to L10, D1 to L10, K10. Great. So there's our path. Now it's not hard to write a program or to examine this grid to learn that statistically this path has only got zeros or ones on it, and that is somewhat revealing for a key hide. So that's something to be avoided. So that's the path there, and that's why we need to be careful of having lots of extra characters in our set of possible characters for our grid, is that it can stand out. So it'll always stand out, unfortunately. So that's an illustration. Um, another thing we can do. So I've already explained how the extra characters are truncated from the end, so we don't need to worry about those. And you can stick with coordinates that are quite memorable, even though the path is too long, and it'll just chop the end off and only present those that were entered originally. So that's all fine. Now, if I go to the next step, now I know this isn't a secure one, but that's okay for our illustration purposes. A tip for more advanced users is we can actually copy this link and paste it into a URL, into the address bar, right? Now that's text, which isn't that useful to us, but if we change this plain to HTML, there's our key hide. Now that came purely from the URL, which is quite long, but this little tip is useful because now we can store our key hide anywhere that will let us create a hyperlink. And not everywhere will let you store a hyperlink that long, but in places that do let you do it, like certain wikis or just plain web pages, you can have a key hide that's very discreet indeed. So that's just an extra tip for more advanced users. Now, one last tip is the usefulness of this key hide is really for being able to get at that key once we've lost access to our password manager. So it's important to remember that path and where you've stored the key hide, and for that reason, it's good to revise or rehearse this bootstrap process for your password manager every 6 months or 3 months, depending on how confident you are with it. So every 6 months, try and get your one-time password generator going by going and retrieving the key from your key hide. And of course, you should remember your username and password. And once you're able to do that, you can bring your password manager online just about anywhere and everywhere without having to, resort to looking at pieces of paper or contacting, significant others to get that information. So that's how you can get the most out of using this key hide generator. Again, feel free to reach out and contact me. Just go and visit freshcode.biz or send me a message through GitHub. Thanks for your time, and I hope you got something out of my presentation.